if the end of the world were coming, frankly, it doesn't matter how you're invested because none of the investment's going to pay off. Instead, I think investors should keep their cool and remember the silver lining is that the best investment opportunities occur when in times of crisis.
Welcome back to Breakout from Breaking Views, brought to you by PGIM. I'm Peter Thal Larsen, global editor of Breaking Views, coming to you from a very wet New York City. Joined again by Edward Chancellor for what is our last breakout discussion of 2022. Eddie, good to see you again.
See you, Peter.
So we've been talking a lot this year about investment bubbles and more particularly investment bubbles deflating. I think we've covered, over the course of the session, we covered government bonds, corporate credit, equities, emerging markets, real estate, and most recently, cryptocurrencies. But today we're going to talk about another bubble, which seems to be the craze for publishing apocalyptic books. Eddie, people have always predicted the end of the world. So why this sudden outbreak now?
Well, possibly because the stock markets are down heavily this year. So that turns people to a pessimistic frame of mind. But as I mentioned in this piece, I came across this quote, a Syrian quote from 2800 BC, which states, "Our earth is degenerate in these latter days. Bribery and corruption are common. Children no longer obey their parents. Every man wants to write a book, and the end of the world is evidently approaching." So as you can see, nothing ever changes. I cite in this piece a few recent apocalyptic works. Notably, a new book out by Professor Nouriel Roubini called Mega Threats, which outlines a number of so-called mega threats, running from what he calls the mother of all debt meltdowns through the great stagflation that Roubini envisages, onto a time when mankind has been enslaved by robots. Roubini, as you'll know, is referred to commonly in the media as Dr. Doom, and he lives up here to his name.
He's living to his name. I mean, you've also, Eddie, contributed to this publishing industry with your book about the price of time, about interest rates, which also talks about the pervasive and pernicious effects of very low interest rates after the financial crisis and the difficulty the world faces as a result of that.
Let me start with Professor Adam Tooze, who's an economic historian at Columbia University, has been writing a series of blog posts about what's now fashionably called the polycrisis, a number of sort of variety of different crises. And Tooze is saying that it's important to look for the systemic interconnections of these various crises. And no doubt blowing my own trumpet, I would say that the extraordinarily low interest rates of recent years has contributed, as we've discussed in previous breakout videos, to the inflation of asset price bubbles, misallocation of capital and risk taking. And this year we've seen those, the rising interest rates and the collapse of these bubbles. So I think that's I think there's a financial aspect and a monetary aspect to the poly crisis.
But it's not just finance, right? I mean, obviously we've got the environmental crisis, we've got war in Ukraine, we've got tensions between the US and China. There are all kinds of things going on.
Yes, and then I cite another book by a geopolitical strategist called Peter Zihan, which is wittily entitled "The End of the World is Just the Beginning." And Zihan focuses on two aspects, which are incidentally also covered in Roubini's book. One is declining population or demographic headwinds, and Zihan takes this to almost, his analysis takes it to a sort of extreme degree, where he says that he says that from Germany to China, countries face demographic challenges. He goes so far as to say that within 10 years, China will no longer exist as a nation state, and that countries will now financially look more like Argentina and politically more like Pakistan. So that's a pretty grim prognosis. And then he goes on to deglobalization, another theme picked up by Rubini, and Zihan argues that the Russia's invasion of Ukraine will be fought to the bitter end, after which Russia will then invade NATO countries, including the Baltic states, Poland, and Romania. So you can see where that's heading.
I guess predicting that the sort of the collapse of China is makes a change from people predicting that China is going to overtake the West and be the sort of the dominant superpower.
And that was a theme of Ray Dalio, the Bridgewater founder's book that came out actually last year, called what's it called, The Changing World Order, in which Dalio looks at the characteristics of empires that have peaked and collapsed, and finds that they're characterized by internal discord, massive growth of debt, and eventually a reversion to money printing. So that all sounds quite familiar if you look at the situation in the US today. And then finally, there's the environmental concerns. And I cite a book that actually came out a decade ago called Immoderate Greatness by a writer called William Orpheus, in which Orpheus points out that each civilization involves the use of scarce raw materials, or sort of ecological depredation, and sooner or later one gets to the point where each empire, from the Roman Empire onwards, gets to the point where it's exhausted its natural resources and then goes into decline. Now, obviously, a lot of environmentalists hold the view that modern economies have consumed far too many natural resources, and we've gone beyond that point. So all these various, monetary, demographic, imperial, civilization, environmental concerns point to a pretty grim future. And I end up by asking, what should an investor do under the circumstances?
Well, exactly. I mean, so what should they do? I mean, you could be quite, if you were being a bit contrarian, you could say, well, this is a peak bubble in gloom, and maybe things will turn out to be less bad. I don't know. What are your parting words on that?
Well, I think that is the point. And look, if the end of the world were coming, frankly, it doesn't matter how you're invested, because the investment's going to pay off. So I don't think, from an investment perspective, it pays to run for the bunker. Instead, I think investors should hold should keep their cool, and remember, the silver lining is that the best investment opportunities occur when in times of crisis. Now, I don't think we've quite got to the depth of the current crisis, but I think over the next year or so, very good investment opportunities are likely to rise. And also bear in mind that our Assyrian friend from 5 millennia ago got it wrong, and people, for better or for worse, are still writing books.
Well, on that uncharacteristically cheerful note, Eddie, thank you very much, and thank you for all the chats this year, and we hope to be back and talking again in the new year.